It has been very well documented the several mistakes that Ferrari has made this season regarding strategy. At the start of the season, it looked like Ferrari had the one-up on Red Bull, and many thought that the prancing horses have gotten their first championship since 2007. However, they have somewhat thrown the championship away after a few driver errors, but mainly strategy errors from the most successful team in Formula One. Now, it has got to be said that not all of the drop points are due to Ferrari, as Leclerc himself has said to have made a few errors, but Ferrari has been far from perfect regarding strategy. To understand what mistakes they've been making recently, let's go back to the first race and take it to step by step to see where it all went wrong for a Ferrari this season. The first race of the season seemed to be almost perfect for Ferrari. Mercedes was nowhere near them, and Red Bull was the closest challenger this time around. Charles Leclerc would start on pole position alongside Max Verstappen, but the race would finish in a Ferrari 1-2, with them securing maximum points, while both Perez and Verstappen DNFing in the final few laps of the race, meaning that Ferrari went into the next round in Saudi Arabia looking like the supreme favourites, while Red Bull seemed to have reliability problems. It seemed like they already had one hand on the championship, so very early on. Going into Saudi Arabia, Sergio Perez would start in pole position, showing that there was a very good race pace in the Red Bull, and they were in the fight. The race would finish in Verstappen in P1, with Leclerc behind him as they had a battle down to the last lap, showing Red Bull has a similar pace to Ferrari. Australia would be the next round, where Leclerc would be on pole and would dominate, leading every lap. Sainz would have a horrible weekend and would DNF early on in the race. Verstappen would also have another engine issue, and after this race, the feeling was that this was Leclerc's and Ferrari's championship to lose. Going into Imola at Ferrari's home race, they were there to impress their home fans, but they did the polar opposite. It was a sprint weekend, and Verstappen would get the maximum points possible, putting him back in the fight. Sainz again DNF and have a first lap crash with Daniel Ricciardo. Leclerc would, however, have his first driver error of the season, pushing too hard, causing him to tap the wall and lose his front ring, dropping him to P6, while Red Bull would finish 1-2. They were clearly back in the fight. Going into Miami, Leclerc and Ferrari would have the upper hand on Verstappen and Red Bull, but many people would be confident in Leclerc to finish the season as the champion. Verstappen would win this race, whilst Leclerc finished P2 and Sainz P3. Now, Red Bull was clearly fighting back from here, and they seemed to have solved their reliability issues. The Spanish Grand Prix seemed like it was an easy win for Charles Leclerc once again, with him starting on pole position and dominating the first few laps. However, the first of many engine issues for Ferrari happened, and yet again they would drop even more points to Red Bull and Max Verstappen. Now, onto the first of many strategy failures. This time at Leclerc's home Grand Prix in Monaco. Now, this race was destined to be a win for Leclerc after not finishing a race here in his career. He would start on pole and lead for the first half of the race. However, Ferrari would make a massive mistake and bring Leclerc in a double stack behind Carlos Sainz. This would cost him huge amounts of time, as he would wait behind his teammate, and ultimately this cost him the win, but also a podium. This was heartbreak for Leclerc, and at his home race, and now it'd been 2 races in a row he would not finish on the podium. Even though Verstappen didn't win this race, Perez would take the win and gain even more points on Ferrari in the Constructors' Championship. On to the next race in Baku, and Leclerc would get his second pole in 2 years around the streets of Azerbaijan, and this would be his 3rd pole position in a row. At this point in the season, the momentum was with Red Bull, but Ferrari Leclerc clearly still had the pace to fight for wins, and it seemed to dominate in qualifying. However, this race was a complete disaster for Ferrari, as both drivers had engine issues and DNF'd. This was all whilst Red Bull took home a 1-2 finish. And now it seemed that Ferrari had blown their championship, and now it was Red Bull's to lose. Canada was next, and Leclerc would already have to start at the back of the grid due to him taking engine penalties at this early point in the season. And this was a worrying sign for Leclerc. Leclerc would fight back to finish in P5, while Sainz would fight to the last lap with Verstappen, but the Dutchman would take another win and his 6th win of the season. For Leclerc, it would feel like years since his last win in Australia, and more pain was to come. So now we go on to the British Grand Prix, where in the race it seemed that Mercedes and Hamilton would be in the fight once again. This race would be a disaster for Verstappen, with him having significant floor damage, which means he would finish in P7. Perez would also have a poor start to the race, having front wing damage after the red flag restart. This was a major chance for Ferrari to get an easy 1-2, possibly if they could get off to charging Lewis Hamilton. A safety car would come out and everyone in the top 4 would box for soft tyres. But no Charles Leclerc, who would have stayed out on his old soft tyres. On the safety car restart, Sainz would be in P1 with Leclerc behind him, with Hamilton and Perez behind on the newer soft compound tyres. Ferrari wanted to put Leclerc as someone who could hold back on Hamilton and Perez, but this would compromise Leclerc's race and hurt his chances of a win. However, it was much worse, as Hamilton and Perez would overtake Leclerc and he would drop down to P4. This was a huge opportunity missed to maximise points for Ferrari. Sainz would take home his maiden win, but many people thought, why did they prioritise Leclerc, who was the closest rival to Max Verstappen? Do you think they should have put Leclerc on the softs and kept Sainz on the hards? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, because this one's a bit more controversial. Austria was the next round, and this was much better for Leclerc, as he would finally take his first win since Australia, and this was very much needed. However, for Sainz, it was heartbreak, as he would have his engine go up in flames, and this threw away a pretty easy 1-2 for Ferrari. After this race, it seemed that Red Bull had the Constructors' Championship in the bag, as they seemed to have solved their reliability issues since Australia. Do you think that if Ferrari had better reliability, they'd still be in the championship fight? I don't know. In France, now, this weekend was the turning point in which Verstappen and the world knew that Ferrari would not win this championship. Leclerc would make a mistake which put him into the wall and finished his race, whilst Verstappen would again take another win. Sainz, however, was put on a 2-stop while everyone else around him was on a 1-stop. This meant that in his final second stint he was fighting for P3 and clearly showed that there were pace in the car to fight for a podium if he was put on a 1-stop. But Ferrari to do a 2-stop and leaving it very late, which meant he had no time to catch up to where he was before. But Ferrari decided to do a 2-stop and leaving it very late, which meant he had no time to catch up to where he was before his stop, meaning that he would finish the race P5. And yet again, another mistake for the strategy team at Ferrari. Now, on to arguably the strangest strategy call in Hungary. In this race, Mercedes had even more pace and Russell would get a surprise podium, whilst Red Bull and Verstappen were starting P10 due to an engine issue in qualifying. So this seemed like Ferrari could close the gap with Leclerc. Charles would pit and Ferrari decided to put on the hard compound tyre, even though several other teams used this tyre and it did not warm up well, and it had no pace compared to the medium. Even though Verstappen would spin, he would overtake Leclerc and would again go on to take another race win, while Leclerc finished in P6 after stopping again for the soft tyre due to how bad the hards were. This call was actually even questioned by Leclerc, and he seemed like he was annoyed at his team and began to question their decisions. After the summer break, we went to Belgium, and Leclerc and Verstappen would start at the back of the grid due to engine penalties again. However, Red Bull looked dominant, and Verstappen would go on to win the race, whilst Leclerc would only finish in P6 after getting a 5-second penalty for speeding in the pit lane. Now, with Verstappen looking unbeatable and Ferrari looking dejected, the championship was pretty done. On to Zandvoort. Now, this was Verstappen's weekend that he wanted to win the most, and he did that, but not with ease. Mercedes would be on the pace once again, and it seemed like they made a strategic error that cost Lewis Hamilton his first win of the season. However, Ferrari would make another mistake on Sainz's pit stop, with them simply not having the tyres ready and leaving a wheel gun out, which Perez ran all over whilst having an unsafe release, giving Sainz a 5-second time penalty. Leclerc did not have the race pace like Verstappen and Russell, which gave him a podium which was handed to him after Mercedes' error with Hamilton. Overall, looking back at the season, it is clear that Ferrari made many errors in crucial scenarios, which has handed Verstappen and Red Bull both championships. Is it a case of Binotto and Ferrari being inexperienced as of late? Do they need to make some big changes for next season? Obviously, we will see in due course. Thank you very much for watching this video, and make sure to like and subscribe for more awesome Formula 1 content.